You're refreshing your banking app on your lunch break, mostly out of habit, the same 3-second glance you give it most days between patients, when the combined total across your savings account and your brokerage finally clears $50,000. It doesn't announce itself. There is no notification, no confetti, just a number that's a little higher than the number from yesterday, sitting in the same grey font it always sits in. You close the app and eat the rest of your sandwich in the break room at the dental office where you've worked for 6 years. And by the time your next patient's in the chair, you've mostly forgotten it happened at all. It isn't until you get home that evening and find an envelope from the appliance store where you bought your dishwasher 2 years ago. A renewal notice for the extended warranty, $89 a year, due in 9 days. That the number from lunch resurfaces at all, in a completely unrelated context. You've renewed this warranty automatically for 2 years without really thinking about it, the same low-grade financial reflex that has you renewing most things automatically. This time, for reasons you don't fully examine, you actually do the math instead. The warranty's paid out for you exactly once, a $140 repair in year 1. You've paid $178 across 2 years to cover a machine that costs, brand new, about $650 to replace outright. And you realize, sitting at your kitchen table, that the actual math behind an extended warranty was never really about protecting you from a $650 loss. It was about protecting you from a $650 loss you couldn't have absorbed without noticing, back when $650 would have actually mattered to whether rent cleared that month. A national survey the appliance chain itself cites in the fine print says something you read twice. Extended warranty programs return, on average, less than 40 cents in claims for every dollar collected in premiums, a spread wide enough that the company offering them is basically guaranteed to profit off anyone who buys one and never files a claim, which is most people most of the time. Nobody's tricking anyone exactly. The company is simply pricing a risk you're paying to transfer, and the price includes their margin for taking it off your hands. You let the warranty lapse, not because $89 suddenly feels like nothing, it doesn't, but because for the first time, a $650 dishwasher failure wouldn't actually threaten anything in your life the way it would have 3 years ago. The number from lunch, the one that didn't feel like anything when you saw it, turns out to be exactly the reason a small, boring insurance decision looks completely different than it did the last 2 Aprils you renewed it without thinking. You mention the letter to your roommate that night, mostly in passing, and she asks, reasonably, whether you're worried about the dishwasher actually breaking now that you've decided not to cover it. You tell her you're not, and you notice, saying it out loud, that you actually believe it, which surprises you a little. The old version of you would have kept paying the $89 out of a specific low-grade anxiety that had nothing to do with the dishwasher and everything to do with not having a real answer to the question of what happens if something breaks and you don't have the money sitting there. That anxiety used to make the $89 feel cheap, a small price to make an entire category of worry go away. It doesn't do that job anymore, because the worry it was covering isn't really there to be covered. Your lease renewal email arrives the same week, and buried in it is an option you've scrolled past twice before without reading closely. A deposit waiver program that lets you skip the traditional $1,800 security deposit in exchange for a non-refundable monthly fee of $19 for as long as you live there, a fee that never converts into anything, never comes back, exists purely as a substitute for cash you don't have to put down. You call the leasing office mostly to ask a clarifying question, and the woman who answers, Talia Renner, explains it the way she's clearly explained it 100 times before. It's popular with newer residents, she says. Most people who sign up for it just don't have $1,800 sitting around to tie up for a year. The fee's the trade-off for not needing it. You do the math sitting in your car in the parking lot afterwards. $19 a month forever for as long as you rent this unit against $1,800 once, fully refundable at move-out, assuming no damage, which your track record over 4 years suggests is likely. Over 3 years, the waiver program costs $684 and returns nothing. The deposit costs $1,800 up front and, historically, comes back to you in full. The waiver isn't really insurance against anything. It's a fee specifically for the condition of not having $1,800 available on the day it's due, priced permanently into every month you don't have it. You'd have taken the waiver without a second thought 2 years ago, not because the arithmetic was different then, it wasn't, but because $1,800 sitting frozen in an account felt like a real cost at a time when $1,800 represented a meaningful fraction of everything you had. Now it represents a rounding error against the number from lunch on Tuesday, and the fee that used to look like a convenience looks, from this side of it, like a toll charge specifically to people who can't yet afford the road. You pay the deposit. Nobody at the leasing office cares which option you pick. Talia processes it exactly the same either way, with exactly the same flat efficiency, and it occurs to you that she's not steering anyone toward either choice. The choice was never really about her at all. Your Honda Fit turns 200,000 miles that same month, a milestone you mark by finally, after putting it off for a year, going to look at something newer, and the salesman's opening offer on financing comes back at 9.4%, a number that makes you wince slightly even before you fully understand why. You mention, almost as an aside, that you could put down a meaningfully larger amount than the standard 10% if it actually changed anything, and the tone in the room shifts in a way you notice immediately. The finance manager, a woman named Corinne Vasquez, pulls up a different sheet entirely. With 25% down instead of 10, the rate drops to 6.1%, not because you asked nicely, but because the bank's actual risk on the loan changed the moment the collateral cushion did. A borrower who's put real money into a car is dramatically less likely to walk away from the loan than one who financed nearly the whole thing, and the interest rate is, underneath all the sales language, mostly just a price on that specific risk. Most people don't have 25% sitting around, Corinne says, not unkindly filling out the new paperwork. So most people don't get this rate. It's not a secret, it's just not usually relevant. You do the math on what the 4-point difference actually costs over the life of the loan. On a comparable balance, it's the difference between roughly $2,900 and $1,400 in total interest paid over 5 years, a gap of about $1,500 that exists purely because you happen to have the cash to change your own risk profile in the bank's eyes. 2 years ago, you'd have taken the 9.4% without blinking, because the alternative, tying up a quarter of the car's price in cash you didn't reliably have, wasn't a real option at all. Nobody at the dealership designed this to reward people who already have money. The bank is simply pricing default risk as accurately as it can, and default risk, it turns out, correlates almost perfectly with exactly the kind of cushion the number from lunch on Tuesday just quietly gave you. You ask Corinne, half out of curiosity, what the rate looks like at 50% down instead of 25, and she pulls the number without much surprise at the question, the way someone answers something she's been asked plenty of times before by people running the exact same math you're running. It comes back at 4%, another meaningful step down, though the total dollar savings between 25 and 50% down turn out to be smaller than the jump between 10 and 25, a diminishing curve rather than a straight line. You don't go all the way to 50. Tying up that much cash in a depreciating asset doesn't make sense just to shave another half point off a rate. And you notice, doing that math, that you're now the kind of person who runs it instead of just taking whatever number gets handed to you first. The market drops 6% over 8 trading days that same month. Not a crisis exactly, just an ordinary correction, the kind that happens a handful of times most years without anyone outside finance really noticing. You notice because your co-worker Milo Andrade, who does patient scheduling at the practice, spends most of a Tuesday afternoon between appointments checking his phone every few minutes, visibly rattled in a way you recognize because you used to feel exactly the same thing yourself, not that long ago. Milo's got maybe $4,000 in a retirement account and nothing else. No real cushion behind it, which means every dollar that account loses on a bad week is a dollar that isn't backed up by anything else in his life. He mentions quietly that he's thinking about moving it all to cash before it drops further, a decision that would lock in whatever loss he's currently sitting on and guarantee he misses whatever recovery follows it, the way markets almost always eventually do after an ordinary correction like this one. You don't lecture him about it, mostly because you remember exactly what it felt like to have every dollar you owned exposed to the same 8 bad days, no separate cushion, sitting somewhere boring and safe to make the dip feel like information instead of an emergency. You check your own accounts that same week, the same modest 6% dip applied to a considerably larger number, and you notice, almost with surprise, that it doesn't produce the same physical reaction in you at all. It's a number changing. It isn't a threat. Because the number from lunch on Tuesday means a bad 8 days in the market isn't the only thing standing between you and a problem anymore. A behavioral finance paper you skim that same evening, sent to you by a friend from nursing school who's oddly into this stuff, says something that stays with you. People without a separate emergency reserve are measurably more likely to sell investments at a loss during a downturn, precisely because a market account without backup functions, psychologically, as both their savings and their emergency fund at once. So any dip reads as danger rather than noise. The fear was never really about the 8%. It was about not having anywhere else to stand. Milo doesn't move his money that week, mostly because the market recovers most of the 6% within 11 days, and the fear passes on its own before he acts on it. You don't say anything to him about the cushion. There is no version of that conversation that helps him build one just by hearing about yours. Open enrollment paperwork lands in your inbox that same week, the same document you've skimmed and half ignored every October for 6 years, and this time, for the first time, you actually read the section on the retirement match instead of scrolling past it to the dental and vision pages. Practice matches 50 cents on every dollar you contribute, up to 4% of your salary. You've been contributing 2% for 6 years, a number you picked once, early on, without much thought, and never revisited. The math sitting right there in the document you'd never actually read says that raising your contribution to the full 4% costs you an additional $840 a year out of your own paycheck and gets you an additional $420 a year from the practice, deposited automatically, a 50% return on that specific $840 that exists nowhere else in your entire financial life, not in any account, not in any investment, not anywhere. You mentioned this to the office's benefits coordinator, a man named Junaid Bashir, who handles enrollment for 4 practices in the network, and he tells you, with the specific weariness of someone who's watched this exact thing happen for years, that most new hires set their contribution rate once during their first week, overwhelmed by a stack of other paperwork, and simply never touch it again, sometimes for the entire length of their employment. I'd guess less than a third of the staff across all 4 offices are getting the full match, he says. Nobody's hiding it. It's page 6 of a document nobody reads twice. You'd read that same document 6 years ago at 23 with $340 in a checking account and a very different relationship to the idea of setting aside more money than felt necessary that particular month. 2% felt responsible at the time. It never occurred to you to ask whether responsible and optimal were the same thing, because optimizing a retirement contribution wasn't the kind of problem your life had room for yet. You raise it to 4% that same afternoon, a form that takes less than 2 minutes to submit. Nothing about your paycheck changes dramatically. What changes is a fact sitting quietly in the background from now on. An extra $420 a year, arriving automatically, that existed the entire time you worked here, and that you simply never asked for. Junaid mentions, almost as an afterthought while you're signing the form, that the practice actually raised the match itself 2 years ago, from a quarter on the dollar to 50 cents, and sent a company-wide email about it that most people, understandably, skimmed past along with everything else that week. You don't remember the email at all. You wonder, walking back to your chair for your next patient, how much of the last 2 years' worth of that improved match you simply never claimed, a number you decide almost immediately not to calculate because there's no version of that math that changes anything now except make you feel worse about a decision you've already fixed. Back at the dealership to finalize the paperwork on the Fitz replacement, you watch the same salesman, a man named Dwayne Kessler, handle a customer 2 desks over with a noticeably different energy than the one Head used on you 3 days earlier. Quicker, warmer, visibly more willing to move on the price before the customer's even finished asking. You ask him about it later, once your own paperwork's done, mostly out of curiosity. Hes straightforward about it in a way that doesn't feel like a sales pitch anymore since the sale's already closed. That guy paid cash, Dwayne says. No financing, no back and forth with a lender, no risk the deal falls through on approval. I can move faster and lower on someone like that because there's less that can go wrong between now and the check clearing. Financed buyers cost me more time and more uncertainty, even at a higher sticker price. You think about your own visit 3 days earlier, the standard opening rate, the shift in tone the moment you mentioned a larger down payment, and you realize the pattern's the same one running through the loan officer's math, the leasing office's deposit waiver, the extended warranty's 40-cent payout ratio. Every single one of these interactions has been quietly pricing the same underlying thing, which is how much uncertainty a person represents to whoever's on the other side of the transaction. The less uncertain you are, the better the terms get, not because anyone's being generous, but because uncertainty itself has a cost, and someone has to pay it. You didn't cross $50,000 and suddenly become a different kind of person. You crossed $50,000 and became a lower-risk counterparty in a dozen small transactions you hadn't even thought of as transactions before. A landlord, a bank, a dealership, an insurance company, all running some version of the same math, all responding to the same underlying signal, none of them coordinating with each other, none of them needing to. You add it up on a Sunday evening a few weeks later, sitting at the same kitchen table where the warranty renewal notice first sat, not because you're trying to prove anything to yourself, just out of the same habit that got you looking at all of this in the first place. The lapsed warranty, the paid-in-full deposit, the better loan rate, the raised retirement contribution, none of it, individually, changes your life in a way anyone watching from the outside would notice. Added together, the loan rate alone saves roughly $25 a month over the life of the car. The warranty you didn't renew saves another $7. The retirement match you finally claimed adds $35 a month in money that was never yours to lose in the first place. None of it required more hustle, more hours, a side project, a bigger paycheck. It required exactly one thing: having enough of a cushion that the small, boring terms attached to ordinary life quietly stopped being priced against you. A statistic you come across that same evening, in an unrelated article about household savings, says that fewer than 4 in 10 adults in your age range have ever had more than $10,000 in accessible savings at any single point in their financial lives, let alone $50,000. A fact that reframes the whole last month for you slightly, not as something you did exactly, but as a threshold most people's financial lives simply never cross, for reasons that have very little to do with effort and a great deal to do with which year the dips and the emergencies happen to land in. You think about Milo, still not sure whether he's raised his own contribution past whatever the automatic default was when he was hired. You think about texting him something about the match, then don't, the same way you didn't say anything the week the market dipped. There's no version of that message that gives him the cushion underneath it. The information was never really the missing piece for either of you. The $50,000 was, nothing about your actual Tuesday looks any different by the end of all this. You still work the same 6 patients before lunch. The Fitz replacement still needs its first oil change in 3 months. What's different is quieter than any of that. You've started noticing, in a dozen small places you never used to look, that world has been quietly pricing you the entire time. And that for the first time, most of that pricing is finally running in your direction instead of against it. You still don't know what the next $50,000 will actually change, whether the pattern keeps repeating in some larger version once the number gets big enough to matter to a different set of people entirely. A mortgage lender, an investment advisor, someone deciding whether a business idea you've quietly been sitting on for years is worth taking seriously. You're not in any hurry to find out. What you do know, closing the laptop on that same kitchen table, warranty notice long since thrown away, is that you're no longer the kind of person who takes the first number anyone hands you without asking once, quietly, whether it was ever actually the only number available.